Hey there everyone, it's Russell. Welcome to the Reading Fabricator, and I'm going to do a video of 23 books by authors that I want to read in 2023. Last year was a pretty good year for me, but I have a feeling that based on some of the length of some of these books here, I'm not going to read as much as I did last year. But it's a good eclectic list nonetheless. And first off, I'd like to thank all those people out there that over the past year have just come and found my channel and just liked it and commented on it, and in particular a few booktubers out there that I'm quite fond of, who I think produce absolutely great work. That includes The Falcon and Quentin over in Egypt Reads and Rambles, and there's also another great one called Library in the Labyrinth. Those three channels are fantastic, so check those ones out. I'll link them below. Absolutely diverse piece of work from all of them. Wonderful channels. I hope to attain that level of greatness in my videos in the years to come. But as it stands, after reading Oppenheimer at the end of last year, I sort of had to come down from it a little bit. I had to sort of just rewire my brain, get into sort of an easy fiction mode. So I kicked off the new year by reading Neil Gaiman. First book was Anansi Boys. I have not read Neil Gaiman in about 5 years. The last time I read him was, I think, Coraline, which I liked a little bit. I didn't think it was too bad. Unfortunately, I was not enamored with Anansi Boys, and I'm going to do a video coming up of that alongside another book of his, which I'm halfway through, which is American Gods. Yep, exactly halfway through American Gods. Speeding through it quite easily. It's not hard, but what I found that is quite interesting is that when I first came across American Gods, I didn't like it. In fact, I detested it. I'm really liking it this time around. I'm not sure why that is. So this has been a really pleasant surprise for me. So I'm going to do a video combining the two of these and doing like a double feature review. Unfortunately, I think I was spending most of my time talking about American Gods, but I mean, Anansi Boys has its moments here and there, but I just don't think it's anywhere near as good as this one here. So Neil Gaiman was a way to kickstart my 2023. The next one I want to read, I think I mentioned this in my previous video a year ago, but I really want to get into Toni Morrison. I've got this hardcover of Beloved. I've lost the cover of it, so it's just the hardback in itself. But everyone keeps telling me that Toni Morrison is one of the greatest American writers. I have no comment on that because I've never read her at all. So many say that Beloved is her best work. So I picked it up, and I'm hoping to get to it sometime this year. And I really want to read more female authors. And unfortunately, there's not a lot in this list. I think there's only maybe one or two, including Toni Morrison. So it's a very manly list, so to speak. But over the coming years, I'm going to try and subscribe to the idea of incorporating more female authors into my reading list, including some that I want to read, such as Zadie Smith. I really want to get into her work, like White Teeth and all that sort of thing. But that's that one there. The next book is Chuck Palahniuk's Choke. I've only read Fight Club by him, which I really liked, and then the other one, I think it's The Invention of Sound, which I detested. I think it's the worst book I read last year. Back then, when I posted that video, a lot of people said, don't write him off just yet. Read more of his work, because this is just a one-off mistake for him. And most people pointed me towards Choke as being one of his better works out there, alongside of Fight Club. I don't know much about it. All it says is that Choke is Fight Club for sex addicts, so I'm sold. And I really was a fan of Fight Club, so I'm not writing this author off. I just wasn't a fan of The Invention of Sound. This one here, Filth by Irvine Welsh. I've not read a single book by him. I adored the movies. I even liked the movie Filth. Made me buy the book. And I've actually gotten partway through it once before. I got about 130 pages, or about a third of the way through it, and then I put it down. And just in the same way as I put down Anna Karenina, it wasn't because I disliked the book. I just, for some reason, just stopped reading it. It's a very despicable novel from what I remember, very nihilistic, very filthy, very grotesque, and I loved it. So I want to get back to rereading it. Probably have to start from the start again. And it's written in the sort of Scottish dialect, so you sort of have to, I say, get about 50 pages into it before you flow with how the language goes. The next one is a bit of an outlier. It is Peter Mayle's A Year in Provence. Most people would know Peter Mayle because of his novel A Good Year, which was adapted by Ridley Scott to a 2006 film with Russell Crowe in it, which I didn't mind. I thought it was quite a nice film. But this one here depicts his time living abroad in the south of France and just coming to terms with the whole idea of it. It sounds beautiful. I really want to get into some more lighter reading on top of the dense reading, and I've got plenty of books here that are dense enough as it is. So this will be a nice little outlier for the collection. The next one is a science fiction book, a finalist for the Arthur C. Clarke Award, Spaceman of Bohemia by Jaroslav Kalfa. I don't know anything about this book here. I did, apart from reading about the first 30 pages of it, I was making my way through it and then I just put it down again. At the time, I just didn't care for it, but I want to give it another reread. I want to try and push my way through this book. It sounds absolutely fascinating, and though it wasn't cheap, I mean, this cost me like $30. I was glad that I found it. So I really wanted to incorporate more sci-fi into my reading list. The only other sci-fi that I've technically read is Dune and Roadside Picnic in the last couple of years. So that's a genre that I've sort of pushed aside that I really want to bring back into my reading schedule. For those who watch the channel, you obviously know that I'm a lover of Cormac McCarthy, and I want to do a reread of The Crossing because I don't remember anything from it apart from the first third of it, which is about the boy taking the she-wolf back into Mexico. So I want to get through The Crossing again, and then I want to read the two remaining books by Cormac McCarthy that I have not yet read. I have never read them. Cities of the Plain, the final part of the Border trilogy. I know nothing about it apart from the fact that it incorporates the two main characters from the previous books into it. It's probably the shortest book in the series and should be an easy read. But the other one that I haven't read is The Orchard Keeper. Now, I am dreading reading this book here because from what I understand, many people rank it as probably as one of their least favorites from him, if not his worst book. I just cannot bring myself to ever have read it in the past. I'm going to have to push through and read it though, and see just how Faulknerian he was back then. I mean, I saw a lot of it in like Suttree and Outer Dark, but yeah, I don't know if this will be any good, but I'm going to get around to reading it. So that'll cap off all my Cormac McCarthy bibliography. Then I can finally do like a big video on like ranking him and that sort of thing like that. The next one is a mainstream thriller, darkly comic book by Kotaro Isaka, Bullet Train, adapted into the movie last year, which I actually quite liked a bit. I thought it was quite enjoyable, and I just need sort of a bit of genre fiction just to get me through some of these other books. And because I like the movie so much, I just wanted to read the book and just see how it turns out. It just sounds like an absolutely fun read, and I want a little bit more of that in my reading life as well. This one here is one of the big boys, Underworld, Don DeLillo. Never made it through Underworld. I read the whole first section, which takes place at the baseball game, which is brilliant. It is a brilliant short story in of itself, but everyone says that the rest of the book is just as good, if not better. It's probably the thickest book. Yeah, I'd have to say it's probably the thickest or second thickest book in this list, and it will take a long time for me to get through this. I'm not one of those people that can read 1,000 pages in a week, even though I have tried. But given how erudite that he is as a writer and how much he incorporates almost like philosophy 101 into his work, and the amount of historical fiction that he incorporates into his work, I assume this will be another dense read by him, although I consider most of the books he's published after Underworld in the 21st century to not be as good. I mean, I wasn't a fan of The Body Artist or Cosmopolis or Point Omega, although I did find The Silence to be a step in the right direction. Whether or not he publishes any books after that, I'm not entirely sure. But I want to get back to some of his classics from the 90s and the 80s. So Underworld will be a great read for me. The next two involve Nick Cave. Now, it was between The Death of Bunny Monroe and the other book of his, the first debut novel by him, and The Ass Saw the Angel, but I assume this will be an easier read, so I want to get through The Death of Bunny Monroe first. And then the second book is a collection of conversations and interviews between Nick Cave and Sean O'Hagan called Faith, Hope, and Carnage. And many people say that this is the closest you'll ever get to getting a deep insight into Nick Cave himself. I mean, this is a guy who doesn't do many interviews, so to speak. So this is like 40 hours of interviews condensed into like a short 8-hour section of time. And I've read the first 30 pages and it's absolutely thrilling. You really just get an absolute sense for the man, the being, the myth, the legend that is Nick Cave. At the back it says, this is not a memoir, this is a conversation. So on the offset, you get straight away that this is unlike any other book. And based on the amount of admiration I had for Stella Maris, which itself was a conversational book, I should have just as much of a good time reading this book here. The next one is by David Foster Wallace, Oblivion, a short story collection I have never read, even though many people say Good Old Neon or Green Old Neon, I can't remember which one, is one of the best short stories to have ever been published in the 21st century. I've read, I think, brief interviews with Hideous Men and The Girl of Curious Hair. So I've read his other short story collections, but I've never touched Oblivion, which I hear is quite a almost like a depressing read, like very dark and sad. But I mean, that's some of David Foster Wallace's work in a nutshell anyway. And I've read most of his other stuff. I've not read some of his essay collections, but I've read enough to know a lot about him. And this should cap off my fiction reading from him alongside The Broom of the System, which I've yet to touch. So that is Oblivion. That should be a nice, easy one as well. The next one is The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Now, speaking of Day Before Source before, he named this in his top 10 favourite books of all time. He claims it to be an absolute masterpiece. It is a collection of letters between Uncle Screwtape and his nephew about all sorts of things. It's just about Christianity and just people in general, and it sounds absolutely fascinating. It's subtitled A View of Our World from the Dark Depths of Hell. Again, this is just a series of conversations through letters, so that I should be able to get through this one quite good. Really looking forward to touching this one. The next one is probably the thickest book in the lot. It's about almost 1,000 pages, and it is The Tommyknockers by Stephen King. Not a horror novel, but a sci-fi book. I've always been a bit mixed on Stephen King, but I did like The Mist, and I just feel that I need to know more about it, get into his work. I don't want to write the guy off. But the reason I want to read The Tommyknockers is that for two reasons. One, he was off his mind on drugs, on a lot of drugs and alcohol when he was writing it. And second, he detests this book. He says it is an absolutely horrible book and he wants nothing to do with it. And that just makes me want to read it all the more. I just want to see if his views on his own work are right, or if I just like the stuff that he doesn't like. I'm not quite sure. It's an absolutely thick book. I know nothing about this other than that it's a sci-fi, and it's going to take me a long time to read this. It was between this and The Stand, unfortunately, and I should have gone with The Stand, but this one here just caught my attention more than the other one. Not quite sure why that is. Maybe it's the cover. Maybe it's just the weird title, The Tommyknockers. But I just want to see what sort of writing he did when he was absolutely off his mind on cocaine and drunk and out of his mind and that sort of thing like that. I just want to see how different his writing was back in that period compared to how he writes now. See just how different of a writer he is. For those of you who have read a lot of Stephen King, let me know if there is a change in his writing from when he was doing all those drugs and alcohol compared to how he writes now. Let me know what you say in the comments below. The next one is some Nabokov, Ada or Ardor. I've yet to read a Nabokov book that I didn't like. Everything he touches is gold. He is probably the greatest. Whether or not his books are the greatest of the 20th century, I don't know, but he is definitely one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. He just has a way of words. His ability to conjure language and project it onto the page is unparalleled. I mean, I've read some of the passages in Penan and Invitational Beheading and thinking, holy hell, who writes like this? This is just on another level. And Ada and Ardor just sounds absolutely fascinating. Again, it's sort of like, from what I gather, it's a love story troubled by incest, and that seems to be a growing theme in a lot of the books that I read. I mean, Stella Marison, The Passenger by Cormac McCarthy, involved an element of incest or love between the brother and the sister. And even in Cormac McCarthy's earlier work, Out of Dark, that was that same thing again. So that seems to be a running theme in a lot of what I read. But this one here, a lot of people that I respect on YouTube talk about how great this book is. So I really want to give this one a shot. And it's been a long time since I read a Nabokov novel. So that's that one there. The next one is some Roberto Bolaño, The Savage Detectives. It was between this and 2666, but I figured the length of 2666 would weigh me down. So I went with something a little bit shorter, and a lot of people pointed me towards The Savage Detectives, even though I have a lot of his other shorter novels, including The Third Reich and I can't remember the other one. But this one here, which was published before 2666, is the one that made him into a star that he was, even though he always associated himself as a poet first. I mean, his fiction is quite fascinating. He's one of the greatest Latin American writers of all time, at least from the short stuff that I've read by him. But I really want to get into some of his longer fiction. And between this and the aforementioned 2666, that is where the majority of the fans lie. So this should be a good precursor to that. I hope to get to 2666 next year, if not the year after that. As it stands, yeah, should get back into him. The next one is Satan Tango. All I know about this book is the 8-hour film that came out in the 90s, I think. But this story here, which, I mean, listen to this. In the darkening embers of a communist utopia, life in a Hungarian town has come to a virtual standstill. Flies buzz, spiders weave, water drips, and animals root desultorily in the barnyard of a collective farm. But when the charismatic Eremias, long thought dead, returns to the commune, the villagers fall under his spell. Is he a prophet and secret agent, or the devil himself? That hooked me straight away. And I've not read a single book by this guy, and I've got 2 of his books. I think the other book I've got is The Melancholy of Resistance. So this will be one of my most anticipated reads of the year. And check out that cover. That's just a beautiful cover right there. The next one is one of my Folio Society books, The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful hardcover. I never actually read it. I just picked it up because it was on sale at the time. It's been introduced by Margaret Atwood, and it's got all these wonderful just illustrations in it. From what I gather, it's sort of a short story collection, and I need to read more short stories in my life, less fiction. So this should balance out my reading a little bit. But it's one of only 3 Folio Society books I own. The other 2 are Confederacy of Dunces and Catch-22, both of which I have read and both of which I admire greatly quite a lot. So I really should get to reading The Illustrated Man just to cap off those 3. The next one is Sylvia Nassar's A Beautiful Mind, The Life of Mathematician John Nash. I've sort of come to a conclusion that every year I want to read one book on a great figure, a great genius of a person. Last year it was Oppenheimer with American Prometheus, and this year I'm going to dedicate it to John Nash, who had schizophrenia, which affected his work life quite tremendously. And watching him come back from that and then eventually win the Nobel Prize. So he went through a lot of ups and downs, but he came out on top in the end. He ended up living a long life. I mean, he only died a few years ago from a car crash of all things. But I also like the film quite a bit, so I'm curious to see how the movie sort of goes away from the book itself and whether or not the book is better. I think it was a winner or a finalist for the National Book Award, so it is highly regarded, so I look forward to getting to that. And then the final book in my 23 for 2023 is Thomas Pynchon, Mason and Dixon. Not quite sure when I'm going to get to this. I haven't read Thomas Pynchon in about 3 years since Gravity's Rainbow, which I greatly admire. And I read the first 3 pages of this book here, and immediately the language threw me off track. I didn't realize it was written in the language of the 18th century or 17th century. I can't remember which century this takes place in. But I figured it's going to be like a Clockwork Orange, where you sort of read through it, and once you get used to the language, it just flows better. You just get used to it and it flows. So I just figured it will be the same with Mason and Dixon. Once I get used to how it's written, everything should come off pretty easy. And a lot of people mention how Mason and Dixon is their favorite book alongside Gravity's Rainbow or even Against the Day. I have yet to read Against the Day. Probably, I think it's his largest book. Plenty of booktubers out there who I admire have read Against the Day and praise it to the heavens and back. So I think I'm going to get to Against the Day next year. I think that'll be my big book that I'm going to read next year. But as it stands, I am going to read Mason and Dixon. I've heard a lot of great things about it. Considered one of the greatest books of the 90s. And it was published, I think, within a year, or within the same year as Underworld by Don DeLillo. And I think not long after Infinite Jest by Dale Foster Wallace. So in the span of 1 to 2 years, you had those 3 big books come out. So that was a good year for reading and writing. But I'm really looking forward to this one. I'm really looking forward to all of these books here. So that is my 23 books that I'm going to read in 23. 2 of them, one of them I finished and one I've almost finished, which is the Neil Gaiman books, which are so different from the rest. But yeah, and unfortunately there isn't a lot of female authors. There's only 2 that I've listed here, but I hope to change that in the future videos that I make. And I probably will be doing some little bit more reading on the side. I want to get to Dune Messiah, the second book in the Dune series as well. Whether or not I can get through these 23 books this year is up for debate, because there's a lot of these that are longer than the books that I read last year. I only read 2 long books last year, and that was Dune and Oppenheimer. But I don't know, I feel good about it. I'm really looking forward to this challenge this year. It should be a good year. And again, to all those who have subscribed in the last year, thank you so much for watching. And I hope that the content that I'm providing for you this year is up to your standard. Thanks very much, and see you next time. Bye.